Michigan-Washington. On a whole completely different note, Michigan-Washington, national championship on Monday. And I want to ask the question because we haven't really been able to get into just Michael Penix strictly. We talked more about the matchup and how I think Michigan is the more complete team. And the more I've been thinking about it, Sam, this Huskies team reminds me of how it's built. I don't know about the Ohio State team this year, but it's kind of Ohio State-ish, right? You have a quarterback who's going to throw for a ton of yards, a plethora of wide receivers, NFL wide receivers for that matter. It's a high-powered offense, but they're kind of soft defensively. And I do think Michigan is built to play that style. I do. They're built to compete with that type of style. And despite how great Michael Penix is, I think Michigan's a team to handle that type of style. I do. I think it's a bad matchup for Washington.
Well, here's the thing. Washington's offense has obviously been fantastic this year. Michael Penix, you can argue he's been the best quarterback in the country all season long. And as far as pure thrower goes, I would say it's probably him. I mean, did you see some of the dimes he was throwing against Texas? Absolutely unbelievable. But it's not just him. It's the wide receiver core. It's Romo Dunze. It's Polk, and it's Jalen McMillan. All three of those guys are NFL wide receivers, and they have the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, which Michigan had won the previous 2 years. So offensively, and Dylan Johnson in the backfield, although he did get hurt to end the Texas game. We don't know if he's going to play. That would be a huge loss for Washington if he can't play, because one of the keys is Michigan absolutely has to shut down the Washington run game no matter who's back there, because we don't want Washington with a balanced offense with a rushing attack that is effective as well. But the bottom line is yes, obviously the Washington's offense is loaded, but so is Michigan's defense. They have never gone up against a defense anywhere close to what Michigan is going to bring to Houston for the national championship game. And here's the thing. You saw what they were able to do, this Michigan defense, against Alabama. They are great at literally every single position. You got 4 players on Michigan with at least 4.5 sacks. All of their rotating edge rushers have at least 4.5 sacks this season. They don't have a Hutchinson, they don't have an Ojabo, but they are very, very deep, and they come after you, especially with some of the blitz packages they were dialing up against Texas. Ooh-wee, that is something that I think can overwhelm any offensive line. And of course, in the defensive backfield, even though they're going up against great wide receivers, they do have corners who can cover, especially Will Johnson. Do I have some concerns that Polk, McMillan, or Odunze, whoever lines up against Josh Wallace and Mikey Sanders, still will be a little bit of a mismatch? Absolutely, but I think that will be offset by the defensive line getting pressure. And I haven't even mentioned the best group of defensive tackles in the nation: Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Chris Jacobs. Are you kidding me? And the linebackers: Junior Colson, Michael Barrett, Ernest Hausman. Whether they are blitzing, covering, like stopping the run, or covering the pass, they are all elite. I've been telling you all season long, and a lot of people, I wouldn't say didn't want to believe me, because you saw that they were a great defense.
Right.
But there was some skepticism about, can they do it against great teams? Can they do it against great offenses? And for the record, Michigan has not faced an offense as good as Washington, not even close. But they did go up against Alabama. They did go up against that SEC speed, and they pretty much overwhelmed them. So we'll see how it goes going into Washington. But I do believe that this Michigan team, this Michigan defense, you will be seeing a lot of these guys as first-round draft picks in the next couple of years. You'll be seeing these guys littered around the NFL, and I think they are built to make a statement against Washington, get to Michael Penix a couple of times, and maybe even force a turnover. Offensively, the key for Michigan is they're going up against the unit, the side of the ball that is the weakest for Washington. Washington was a middle-of-the-pack Pac-12 defense, and I get it. Here's where you could say that's a little bit inflated or deflated. They did go up against the Bo Nix 2,000-yard receivers and Bucky Irving-led Oregon offense twice. And Oregon put up some points on them, but those are 2 tough matchups. They went up against the Caleb Williams-led USC ones. They went up against Quinn Ewers, Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jatavion Sanders once, and all of those teams put up some points against them, but they were able to get the victory. However, what concerns me about what should concern you about Washington, that maybe their defense just isn't that good overall, is they also gave up 32 to Cal. They gave up 33 to Stanford, and they gave up 28 to a Cam Rising-less Utah team. And what should concern you overall about Washington go up against Michigan is they played Washington State and Arizona State way, way, way too close. Those are 2 Pac-12 bottom feeders, and Washington barely escaped against those teams. I expect Michigan to be able to run the ball very, very effectively. I think this is one of the top rushing rushing offenses, maybe the top rushing offense that Washington has faced this season. I expect a big day from Blake Corum. I expect a couple of runs from J.J. McCarthy. I expect him to control the clock, but I also wouldn't be shocked if at some point, I know this isn't really in Jim Harbaugh's DNA or the Michigan's offense DNA. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit a couple of big plays. I think that they're that JJ's going to have a lot of time in the pocket. I know Braylon Trice is a damn good defensive end as well, but nobody else on the Washington defense scares me. It wouldn't shock me if J.J. McCarthy hit a few big plays in the passing game, because here's the bottom line. J.J. McCarthy didn't play perfect, but he also hit a few big plays in the passing game against Alabama. And against Washington, you're not going up against Kool-Aid McKinstry. You're not going up against Terrion Arnold. You're not going up against Caleb Downs. You're not going up against Chris Braswell. You're not going up against Dallas Turner, although Trice for Washington is also maybe a first rounder. This Washington defense is gettable, and I don't expect Michigan to punt very many times, and I expect them to get a few very, very key stops against Washington, mainly led by the pass rush, because sometimes I don't think that Michael Penix is going to have time to throw. And I don't think guys like Sanderstil or Wallace can contain the Washington receivers for 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 7 seconds, 8 seconds. But I think they can contain them for 3 or 4. And sometimes I think that is all Michael Penix is going to have.
Yeah, and for people, and I saw a couple comments that stated this, and I don't believe this game will be a shootout. Because I think Michigan will force Washington to play their type of game. That's what I believe. I think this is going to be about time of possession, because a hoof-hearted put here. Washington's defense had exactly 1,000 plays run against them this season, which is dead last in the FBS. They can't get off the field, which, again, who can, pound the football and control time of possession? It'd be Michigan, one of the best O-lines in the country. But look across the field, Washington has one of the best O-lines in the country. You could argue they're the best. Michael Penix has been sacked like 10 times this year, and he's not a mobile, as you define a mobile quarterback. He sits in the pocket. He's calm. He's composed. He gets rid of the football really quickly, which helps. Obviously, those sack numbers. JJ, I think, has gotten sacked double the amount of times than Michael Penix. Doesn't mean Michigan has a bad offensive line. It just means that's Washington's offense. They get the ball out quickly. Guys get open. Now, the biggest matchup to me is this Michigan pass rush against this Washington offensive line. That's it. Because, again, if you can't get to Michael Penix, it's I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's very, very hard to cover these NFL receivers. It's just unfair to guys. Will Johnson, I think you'd have confidence in, but for the other guys, it's just unfair. You can't expect these guys to cover for 5, 6, 7 seconds. They have to get to the quarterback, and Michigan has shown they can do that by committee. They don't have, like you said, an Ajabo or an Aiden, but they get it done. I think collectively, you could argue that they're the best pass rush in the country, collectively, as a defense. So I think they can do it, but that's got to be the biggest matchup to me, Sam Flannel, is can you get to Michael Penix? Because if he can't, he's just going to pick you apart. He is. But doesn't mean Michigan can't force turnovers as well. Like that Texas, you talk about the other side of the ball, their run defense, when I go back to time of possession, Texas averaged almost 6.5 yards per carry.
Sure.
Like, what do you think Michigan's going to average?
Well, and the funny thing is, you can look at that as with Texas, it was by committee, because their best running back, Jonathan Baxter, or Brooks, I believe, was out for the entire, not out for the season, but he was out for that game. So, but you also saw Quinn Ewers getting some scrambles and some design runs on Washington. But here's the thing: J.J. McCarthy is more mobile than Quinn Ewers. That's why I expected that J.J. McCarthy will make some plays in the running game as well. And yeah, and as far as getting pressure on Michael Penix, yes. I do respect the Washington offensive line. I respect what they've done. I respect the fact that they've given Michael Penix a lot of clean pockets, and run blocking, they've been good as well, because Dylan Johnson had a damn good year and wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver. But this Michigan defensive line, like I said, edge rushers, they don't really have stars, but they are 4 deep of guys that can at times be terrors in terms of pass rushing. Their front seven's
incredible.
You saw it against Alabama. You saw it in other games. They don't have like NFL first rounders at edge rush, but they do at the interior defensive line. They do in the defensive backfield. At linebacker, I believe Junior Colson is a first round type talent. I just think positional value and maybe size will make him slip, but he's still a damn good player. I've said many times that this defense is just terrifying. I think it's the best defense in the country, including Georgia's, and I think they're going to show out against Washington. Do I think Washington will make a few plays and score some points? Absolutely. But as you said, time of possession. Who is more built to run that 4-minute offense or have those 5-minute, 6-minute, 7-minute drives than Michigan? It's and Blake Corum. No running back can just get those like 4 or 5 yard runs more consistently behind an offensive line than Blake Corum. And I think he's going to do that again in this game. I expect Michigan to win, but I also think, let me just say this. One thing that I haven't even mentioned is that, because I don't want to give my score prediction just yet, that's for later. One thing that Michigan 100% has to do better is, for God's sakes, clean up the special teams. Clean up the special teams for the love of God. And I even joked about this on BDE yesterday, but I'll just joke about it again. I'm almost about to say, damn field position, just have no returner back there. Don't risk a turnover, because Samaj Morgan gifted Alabama a 44-yard touchdown drive early in that game, and Jake Thaw almost cost his team a game-losing safety. When have you ever heard that happen? But to his credit, he got his wits about him. He got the ball back at the 1 yard line. He did. He didn't panic. But also, it wasn't just that. It was the bad punting by Tommy Doman, who's been very good this year. It was the missed field goal, which was more the fault of the snap. And speaking of the snap, there was a bad snap that forced a missed extra point, or not even a missed extra point. It was just a bad snap that the holder couldn't field, and obviously he had just fall on the ball and they didn't get the extra point. If you clean up the special teams, if you play your game, Michigan, if you can force a couple of big stops, maybe get a couple of timely sacks, and maybe a turnover of Michael Penix, I think it's all set up for Michigan to win, but you just got to clean up some of those mistakes. They didn't play a perfect game against Alabama, but they got away with it, and they won.
This comment here, Balter says, Texas only had a couple big runs, inflated numbers, and they only showed up in the last couple minutes of the third. Huskies were dominating them and let their foot off the gas. And to his point, C.J. Baxter, he had a long run. His longest rush was of 16 yards. Jaden Blue, 16 yards. Quinn Ewers, 21 yards. So and that's the thing with Michigan, and they're going to keep pounding the rock, and then, boom, Blake Corum gets free for 25 yards. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, Donovan Edwards, you can revive him from the grave. Hey, hopefully he can do something.
If you're counting on Donovan Edwards to provide you anything, don't.
Yeah.
And for the record,
it'd be nice.
I love what Donovan Edwards did last year. He's always going to be, in some ways, a hero for Michigan, just based on his heroics last year at Ohio State and even in the Big Ten Championship, Penn State, and all of that. He was great. But this year, I can't think of a more disappointing player in college football. I thought he was going to explode this year, and he has basically done a whole lot of nothing. His season high in rushing yards in a game is 52. Which happened against Penn State, ironically. Probably the best defense they've faced besides Alabama. But still, Donovan Edwards, even when he had his chance to get his hands on the ball in this game, he dropped a pass. And on that pass back to J.J. McCarthy, he almost threw away the game. I know it's early on in the game, but that was a fumble, a scoop and score by Dallas Turner waiting to happen if it wasn't for J.J. McCarthy's insanely athletic play. I think this season and going into Washington, and I think Donovan Edwards has somewhat validated that at sometimes this year. I don't know if the coaches trust him. Mm-hmm. And they trust Blake Corum implicitly. I don't think any coaching staff trusts a single player more than Michigan trusts Blake Corum. And can you blame them? He's as steady Eddie as you can get, while at sometimes being special.
Q-Ball93 says, you think Noah is bad? Thank you for the donation, by the way. He says, you think Noah is bad? In Mandarin, an X is pronounced as an S. Can Flannel pronounce Penix in Mandarin?
What? I see what you're doing. Penis.
All right, let's go to break. Here. When we get back, God.
That was funny. That was funny.
What are we doing here?
I don't know. Just to add to Flannel, I honestly think Donovan Edwards might be your X factor here in this game. You're going to have to give Blake Corum a rest. And even though he's had a very disappointing season so far, I believe, 3.5 yards per carry?
Yeah. Terrible.
I mean, you got to look at it this way. Last year, when Blake Corum did go down, he did thrive in those big games. And like I said, you're going to have to sit Blake Corum from now and then. He's going to need a breather. He might be your X factor here that, Washington might not be expecting.
I don't hate that. My only counterpoint to that is, yes, for most running backs, they need a breather from time to time. But if you're Blake Corum, probably playing in your last college football game ever for the national championship, he has shown that he can tote the rock like 27, 29, 30-plus times, and he doesn't get tired. He only gets stronger. In a perfect world, which I would have preferred throughout the season, but it hasn't cost Michigan, so I can't even say anything. I would have liked to see a more balanced rushing attack. I would have liked to see Donovan Edwards provide more of an explosive element in the rushing attack that wasn't really there for the most part, for all parts with Donovan Edwards, maybe more in the passing game. But at the same time, Blake Corum is just, he's a bell cow. He 100% is, and I think he is willing to take the ball 30 times and just keep going and going and going because he's proven it in the past. And oh, by the way, Blake Corum actually had one of his most impressive pass catching days of his life, probably the most. He caught a big 4th and 2, and he caught the first touchdown of the game. So ideally, I'd like to see it from Donovan Edwards, and I think if he makes a couple of big plays, it's good night for Washington. And JB, you can't blame me for this. I just can't count on it this season, unfortunately. Or I can't bank on it.
Well,
If that makes sense.
well, I'll tell you what. Even though Donovan Edwards has been disappointing, if I saw him working on at Planet Fitness, I wouldn't judge.
Oh.
Because it's a no judgment. It's a judgment-free zone.
I'd go up and say, like, I'm a big fan.
Yeah. You don't judge at Planet Fitness.